All right. Okay, so I see a bunch of people joining. That's great. Okay, so before we talk about what is the dual nature of creativity, I'm going to explain why you should believe me about this. And really, there's no good reason for you to believe me. I'm just a guy that likes this and reads about it and thinks about it, but I'm not an authority by any means. I started a blog about this so I can kind of get my thoughts written down and maybe get feedback and start a conversation about some of my theories. And I've been writing for 3 months now, and I have one reader, which is great. It's my sister, so I'm doing really great so far. So I'm an engineer here, and I write fiction in my free time. And I've got this novel coming out next week, actually. And yes, this session is a blatant advertisement for my book. I regret nothing. Go buy my book.
What's it called?
Son of Shadow, Hero of Light. And I go by C. Lewis S. So that you'll be confused by C.S. Lewis. And hopefully it does have strong Christian themes like his, so beware. I'm not trying to convert you or anything. Okay, so my theory about creativity posits that it has two sides. One side is art, and the other is engineering. Now, a lot of people will say art and technology, or you always hear art and technology talked about together. But I don't think that's a very good place to distinguish it, because technology is the product of creativity, whereas art and engineering are processes or methods or manifestations of creativity. So art looks like that. It's messy, there's no real start and end. It's hard to know when you're done making a beautiful piece like this. It's emotional. There's no real goal to it. How would you guys describe art? Is there anything that comes to mind when you think of art?
Personal.
Personal. Cool. I like that. And this, in contrast, is engineering. It has a clear start and end, input and output. It's logical, it's functional, it's linear. There's a bear with wings. That's engineering. Can anybody describe engineering in their own words to me? Anything come to mind when you think of engineering?
Problem solving.
Wow. My kids are really into Jinx right now, so I have to really be careful what I say, because they're always like, Jinx, gotcha, Dad. Problem solving. Great, that's cool. So why do we need both together? So one without the other will eventually stagnate. So if we think of Canvas, if all we focused on was making it faster and more features, what would happen to the user experience? It would be terrible. After a while, it would just get bloated and be bad. But we need this kind of artistic wandering to make the user experience great, and that's what really keeps customers, right? And on the other side, if you're artistic and you make these wild paintings that only you understand because nobody understands the emotion that you're putting into it, well, you're not going to affect a lot of people, obviously, and it's going to be hard to make an impact over and over. Whereas great engineering coupled with artistic beauty sustains creative projects and creative individuals over the long term. So their work can have an emotional impact over and over and over for many people. So without both, you stagnate. So now that I've kind of covered my theory of the dual nature of creativity, let's talk about why Apple and Pixar rule the world. So what is Apple known for?
Yosemite crashing Wi-Fi.
That's exactly what I was going for. And what is Pixar known for?
Animation.
Toy Story.
Movies.
Toy Story, movies, yeah.
Got an incredible track record. They've had like 2 even sequels kind of flop, but even those weren't really flops. Like,
Yeah.
amazing.
They've never
for a
lost
movie
money.
studio. So, yeah.
Yeah, what I think of when I think of Pixar is like crying at the end of every movie. So your first thought probably is that Apple is engineering and Pixar is art in this theory, right? Well, you're wrong. Whether or not you thought that. Steve Jobs said, I think part of what made the Macintosh great was that the people working on it were musicians, poets and artists and zoologists and historians who also happen to be the best computer scientists in the world. You don't think about that when you think of engineering very much, but I love that kind of dichotomy there. So Apple and Pixar are both art and engineering. Apple has an artistic approach to engineering work, and Pixar has an engineering approach to artistic work. So Apple and Pixar make blockbusters every time, right?
No.
No, that's okay. I know that's up for debate. A lot of people with the Yosemite thing and lots of other things don't like
Generally,
that.
yes.
But Pixar has had a #1 box office release for every movie. Every movie. And Apple is like the richest company in the world, and people stand outside their store for like 2 weeks to get their newest thing. So opinions aside, they're doing something right? So you're probably wondering, do they have some sort of magical formula or secret process or some creative genius that makes blockbusters every single time? Well, Horace Dediu from asimco.com says it's not a process. It's values or priorities. And a link to that is actually, so to his work, Horace Dediu, is in that notes and quotes document that I linked to. So it's priorities, it's values of the company or of the individual. So their priorities make them sustainably creative over and over. They're not one-hit wonders. They do it every time. And Ed Catmull of Pixar president, he said, hold lightly to goals and firmly to intentions. So as we learn about priorities, that's what we're going into, we could focus on what it would take to manage creativity here at Instructure, and we could learn some very valuable insights. But today we're going to focus on you guys as individuals. How do you become a more creative individual? So you need to adopt and adapt the priorities of groups like Apple and Pixar to help you become a more creative individual. So you're not just a one-hit wonder, but you can do it consistently over time throughout your whole life. So let's learn about these priorities and values of Apple and Pixar. So it's kind of hard to learn the priorities, the internal workings of Apple, because they're a little secretive. But through this book, Johnny Ive by Leander Caney, and from a link that I'm going to post in Slack, I've learned a little bit about their priorities. So it's actually in the quotes and notes file, but I'm going to put it here in Slack for you. There you go. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to read through this. It's not too long. And then we'll talk about it. Does anybody need more time? I'm pretty slow reader, so you're probably already done already. So anything jump out at you, or anything you would like to share about that? Still Either you're bored and searching on the internet, or you're reading this. Any thoughts? Okay, go ahead.
I like the last bullet point where he's not a magician, he practiced a lot, because I think it's really easy to look at someone that's really successful and just think they're like gifted, or there's something about them that's just like they naturally have.
Yeah.
But I think most of the time the reality is that people practice over and over and over to get where they're at. So it's good to be reminded that.
Yeah, and for example, like Michael Jordan, he was my hero as a kid, and I know around here that's probably not a good thing to say, but for the Chicago people, you probably love that. But I used to think he was just born amazing, you know. And then I had this guy that was a team captain on my team that was just really awesome, and he was the coach's son, so I thought, you know, he's probably just born great. But then I learned that Michael Jordan, like, you know, he didn't make the cut like 2 years or something when he was younger. And he just practiced over and over for hours and hours and hours. So yeah, that's really cool. They just work really hard to get there. Okay, so here's some of the things that I learned from the book and from that thing I posted. It's not a comprehensive list, and we probably don't know all the values of Apple, but here's a few things that they do. We're not going to really go into them too much, but you can learn a lot about art and engineering from Apple. And they're in that the link to that document I posted there in Slack. I see some people writing them down. So. Okay, so now let's talk about Pixar's values. And they're a lot easier to figure out what their internal workings, because Ed Catmull, the president, he wrote a book and he pretty much spilled the beans about how they work. It was pretty cool. And this again is not a comprehensive list of everything, but it's a pretty amazing list. Things that, as I was reading this book, I never would have thought of. But now we're going to learn about each one of these things and go into a little bit more depth. You've actually made it to the good part of the session because it's when I shut up finally. So we're going to do a little bit of reading, and you're going to have a decent amount of time, and then we're going to talk about these more. So in the document that I linked you to, towards the bottom, there's a heading for blog posts, and there's a blog post or two for each one of these things. And so you're going to go through and read just one or two of those, and then we're going to have you guys teach the rest of the class. So choose one or two that interest you, and then we're going to talk about it. So I'll shut up now.
Sorry, I didn't catch it. Where do you find the blog post?
So I put it in Slack. It's the first link there in Slack. Do you want me to post it again? Panda Creativity. Panda-Creativity. chance to read one, two? Wouldn't give you any more time, but Josh stole my time, so wait. So, who read about candor? Can you teach the rest of us what you are, not necessarily what you learned, but what it says, what Pixar does?
Yeah, so with Pixar, as they're making the movie, at the entirety of the process of making the movie, they have these sessions where everybody gives their feedback to how it's going or what the project's looking like. And they are completely open and honest. And oftentimes that means brutal. That candor, that willingness to talk openly about how it's going, allows them to flesh out the things that are good and to continually remove the things that are not good. And that continual process of improvement is what leads to the final product that's pretty good. And I think that the same thing applies to a lot of us. We're afraid of offending or being offended, and so we don't get the feedback, we don't get the extra information that we really need in order to make the project better. And it can apply to any kind of project, coding or writing a book, or I've had plenty of projects that I've put in front of family or friends, and they've said, that's nice. And I said, that's not helpful.
Yeah. I don't feel it. Go ahead.
So I actually read the book, the
Creativity.
and one of the things on candor that he talked about that I thought was super interesting was how he, as a manager, kind of had this meta process where he was constantly trying to break down the games people would play to avoid being candors with each other, because they'd find something that would work, and then immediately subconsciously people would start to game the system, right? And not that they're bad, it's just people try so hard not to have candor that he was constantly like changing the room and changing where people sit and changing the agenda and everything just to try and shake things up enough that people were kind of off their game a little and would actually stay with it. Yeah.
Cool. Anybody want to add anything to that? That was a really good summary.
I think their feedback really stinks.
It's
meta. Sorry, I was just trying to.
You guys are great. Don't listen to me. Who read Fail Fast? Who read about that? Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So just like the general concept was like to get better at whatever craft you're trying to get better at, that you should have like iterative trial and error, and fail quickly. And just like the general idea of the whole article is that like failure is a good thing and it shouldn't be looked at as negatively, but rather as when you fail, it shows you that you took a path that you won't take again, and kind of helps in an iterative fashion help you find the correct path by discovering what doesn't work. So yeah.
Want to add it?
That was kind of my lab motto when I was a scientist, and I think I really liked the way you talked about that science. That's really the essence of the scientific method, is to let yourself or to test things quickly so that you can determine what doesn't work, and that's the iterative process that leads us to kind of understanding what does work.
Awesome. Yeah. So he's got a really good quote here that I want to read. In general, I found that people who pour their energy into thinking about an approach and insisting that it is too early to act are wrong just as often as people who dive in and work quickly. The overplanners just take longer to be wrong, and when things inevitably go awry, are more crushed by the feeling that they have failed. There's a corollary to this as well. The more time you spend mapping out an approach, the more likely you are to get attached to it. It can be difficult to get free of it and head in a different direction, which more often than not is exactly what you must do. I really like that. Anybody want to add to that? Something they read? Okay, who read Hungry Beast versus Ugly Baby? Go ahead.
Yeah, so the Hungry Beast is the the system that's already in place. It's the corporate world, the known, the path that is already there, and it has to be there. It has to be fed. You have to have financial departments. You have to have marketing. You have to have sales. You have to have all these things that have always been around, and they have to be supported. And it's just something that never goes away. So it's the hungry beast that's always needing to be fed. The ugly baby is the newborn idea, whatever it is. And he uses the analogy that most babies when they're newborn are ugly, which I can attest to is true. But they get prettier as time goes on. But you have to give them time, you have to protect them. And the hungry beast wants to push or kind of squish the ugly baby, wants to be the standard. But so the ugly baby needs to be protected. It needs to be fostered. It needs to be given time to blossom and grow and get prettier. And if you don't do that, then innovation will never happen. Those new ideas will never get footholds. And so if the environment isn't adequate to protect those new ideas and give them time to blossom, then the hungry beast will just continue to dominate, and then eventually your organization will do what many do, and that's plateau or eventually decline and fail.
Yeah. He's got this.
It's interesting that people are so upset right now that Google has both Angular and Dart and the closure stuff they're doing internally. It's like 3 different ways of doing apps internally that are mutually exclusive in many ways. And yet, like, that's a really cool internal ecosystem for seeing what can fail.
Yeah, it's cool. It's cool to have 3. It's interesting that he talks about how his movies, all Pixar movies, are terrible at first, and that they're ugly, and they're not just young, small versions of the awesome movies that they're going to be. They're terrible when they start. Like Woody, when they first started imagining Woody for Toy Story, he was a jerk. I don't know if anybody has seen they got this early storyboard where people are talking out the lines, and Woody's like ordering the toys around. He's like making fun of Slinky Dog, and like he's being a total jerk. And that's how they started. And because they wanted to take him from a jerk to a nice guy, but so it's not like just a small version of the movie that they end with. It's totally different, and it has to be torn apart and ripped apart, and you have to be honest. Everybody working on it has to be honest about what's terrible. Nobody likes Woody like that. They're not going to fall in love with him. But we did the way that they made it eventually. Cool. How about change and randomness? Who read that? Would you talk about it?
Yeah, I'll do my best to remember. Mainly just change is inevitable, and rather than trying to avoid it, just accepting it and then embracing it. And without change happening, you're not going to innovate or grow in any particular way.
Yeah. Anybody want to add to that? I read about that one. He said a lot of times people think of changing your mind as weakness, but then he says Steve Jobs was known for changing his mind immediately or instantly in the light of new facts. And I don't know anyone who thought he was weak. That's something I really learned about Steve Jobs. He was like, you only think of him as like super passionate, get in your face and say how terrible it is. But I guess as soon as he heard something new, he would change his mind instantly, and you'd probably think he's got some problem or something. But so that's pretty cool. And he also says here that they had some tricks, and one of the directors, Pete Docter, he would say, okay, this would be a big change if we were really going to do it, but just as a thought exercise, what if? Or he'd say, I'm not actually suggesting this, but go with me for a minute. When he would try and make these big changes that people wouldn't want to hear, he would try and trick them. He said that he would try and trick them so that they wouldn't think it's a change. Let's just do a thought experiment, How about mental models? Anybody read about that one? I know there were a lot of different posts on that, but this is a really foundational one. This is really important. And nobody read it. All right, would you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I read one that was like 5, I don't remember what it was called, but there were like 5 different mechanisms to get into a different frame of mind. And one that really stuck out to me was the first one. It's called Midstream Feedback. So they had daily meetings where they would kind of critique wherever a person was in their scene. So every single day, even though their project wasn't done, they would hold these daily meetings to critique each other. And basically, the idea behind it is once you realize you don't have to be embarrassed, it's kind of something that's going to happen, that you can become more creative.
Awesome. So another one I want to talk about really quick, and I'm going to go over, so I better be quick, is they would give drawing classes to everybody at Pixar, and you think, okay, they're animators, why would they want drawing classes? But really, he said, drawing is not about learning, or these classes were not about learning to draw, they're about learning to see. He said that a lot of times if you think about a human face, and somebody tells you draw a face, you'll draw, what the picture you have in your mind, and like the eyes will be too big, the forehead will be too small, things like that. And if like somebody tells you to draw a chair, you draw this generic chair, but that's not what this chair looks like. You've just got this mental model of what a chair or what a face looks like, right? So he would have these classes so that people would learn to see and not just draw or do what they thought in their minds, in their mental models. And that was a huge part of this book, and I wish we could get into it more, but he said that they would have techniques like putting something upside down to draw that, or telling you to draw the space around the chair or something so that you wouldn't, so you'd get out of this mental model. And that's a huge thing about creativity, getting out of your preconceived notions of what you want to do and seeing what actually is there. Okay, who read about the last one, Short Experiments? Would you tell us about it?
Sure. Yeah, this was about Pixar's shorts that they do in the front of their movies, and how they were started in part because they thought that it'd be a good way to like find good directors. Like they could test out people directing these shorts, and then if they did well, then they'd probably be good at the full features. And also, they thought that they'd be able to push technology that way because they could do these little things and just like go for big tech. But it's cool because it turned out that they were totally wrong about that, and that I guess the directors of the shorts that were good weren't necessarily good at doing full feature films, and the technology was really pushed on their feature films. But it had benefits anyway because it allowed people to be more creative. I mean, they had to do the long features, and it's sort of like the Hungry Beast, Ugly Baby thing. The long features make the money, and there needed to be a little more structure to them, whereas the shorts you could be a little more free and take risks, and if you screw up, it's not a huge deal because it's only a 2-minute, $2 million thing.
Throw away $2 million.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, there's 5 things that they actually, so they wanted 2 things out of these shorts, and they gained 5 things, but they weren't the things that they were expecting. He said broad experience and less specialization for employees because it would be small teams, and because of small teams, they'd have deeper relationships for working in other areas of the company. 3, it forges bonds with moviegoers. 4, it sends a message to employees that Pixar values artistry. And then 5, it's a relatively inexpensive way to screw up. I wish I had $2 million to just screw up on, but being willing to screw up and allow yourself to fail and do these short experiments is really important in creativity. Okay, so just did that. So creativity has a dual nature. There's art and engineering. Art is more emotional, while engineering changes the way that we do things. But one without the other eventually will stagnate. You need both to be sustainably creative throughout your whole life. And the values that we've learned are actually attributes of art or engineering. And if you apply them, you won't be a one-hit wonder. You'll be able to be creative throughout your whole life. So thank you for your time. I have a few more minutes for question and answers. And I've got some suggested questions if you want to talk about those for the 5 minutes that we have.
How have you seen these topics that we've gone over here, how have you seen those play out in the team that you were on currently?
I think we're really good at being candid with each other about the code that we write, we're not afraid to say, hey, that really was terrible, you need to do this again. That's one of the big things. And kind of daily feedback about what you're doing. Those are two big things, I think. Did I see another question?
I was just going to ask what you thought, if along the same lines, what you wish you would see more in structure to foster that more culture like that.
Short experiments, I think, would be really interesting. I know it kind of feels like Bridge and those kind of things are small experiments that blossomed, but I think if teams and individuals were allowed to do short experiments more, we'd have more great ideas that led into things like Bridge that make us money. And trying to push people to learn to see correctly, maybe art classes of some sort, not just drawing, but anything that gets people out of their normal write code, answer phone calls type of mindset, but something that broadens their horizons and makes them think in different ways, I think would be great.
How well do you think our hacking, like hackathons, fast hackwords and all that, how well do you think they sort of support the short experiments value?
Yeah, I think they go a long way to doing that, and it's awesome. I love those. They could be better, but I think it's awesome.
Yeah.
Just generally speaking, what would you suggest in structure do to better align with this mentality?
I don't know. Does anybody have any ideas?
I think we should really value our blunt compadres. I can think of a few people who are just like really blunt. They stand out, and we should just be really grateful for that and encourage more of it. Because we're all really nice to each other otherwise.
Yeah. This UI looks pretty good. That way a customer's gonna hate it. You have to be blunt. I don't know. I think the things I've already said are pretty much things off the top of my head that I can think of. Probably should have thought about that more as preparing this.
How do you balance candor with not being a jerk?
I saw you choosing your words carefully there.
Yes.
Steve Jobs didn't try very hard about that.
Yeah,
I know, that's it. And I don't think that's the best way to do things,
I think
honestly.
relationships. I think if you have strong relationships and you understand where the person is coming from, it doesn't, not that it doesn't matter what they say, but it helps a lot. It goes a long way.
It needs to be focused on the project or the thing and not on the person.
Yeah.
So if I say, I really don't like the way this page is looking, that's very different than you did something dumb on this page.
You're a terrible artist. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, kind of like piggyback off that, like if you both have the same end goal, so if it's like you write something, I'm like, oh, that's awesome, but like, oh my gosh, like what if we can make this like twice as fast and then this page will load really quick and like users will love it, and like then can we take this code and transform it a little bit? And it's not about the person, it's about the like mutual goal that you're working for, and it feels more like a teamwork event, like to make something better than like an attack on the person. That's kind of how I see it.
Don't read into it.
Yeah.
Somebody says like that looks like shit. That doesn't mean it's your fault. It just means that their view is different than yours, and you need to figure out what's right and what's different and what's wrong.
It's hard to accept that. It's definitely human nature to want to feel like you failed and that is bad. But yeah.
Yet instructing the receiver of criticism to not take offense does not free us from the obligation to not try to offend.
But every communication is two people, and two people are involved in that communication.
Yeah.
So I guess it's part of both.
I was gonna say, like, the tone with which you communicate makes a huge difference too. You can say the same thing like 5 different ways. And so, like, for example, like, Cameron Matheson says, like, that's a really stupid idea, but he always says it with a big smile. Yeah. So, and so it doesn't, like, hurt as much, you know? Like, and then he laughs and it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be great if, like, we value, this is an instruction problem, it's an American problem, like, debate more, like, just hearty, like, just totally passionate, principled debate. And even when you're only 51% sure of what your position is, debate can still be really useful because it brings out a dialectic where everybody's having to hash things out.
Yeah, and then later you shake hands and, you're fine with each other. That would be very valuable. Yeah. You're gonna say something?
So I found it's helpful whenever if you're about to give some harsh feedback, to ask the person permission to give them that feedback. And then it sort of breaks it down and kind of sets the right intent. And say, hey, I do this with my kids when we're coaching them in sports and stuff. I'll say, hey, do you want to talk about that play? And sometimes no, right? but it kind of breaks it down as opposed to me just coming up to them and saying, hey, let me tell you what you can do, you blah, 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 blah. I'm still trying to help them, but if I give them the chance to say, okay, yeah, tell me what I need to do.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, we're out of time. Thanks a lot for your time and coming here.